Audio check. Audio check. Loud and clear? What's going on, my 7th grade students? Let's get this party started with our stuff that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be moving in to life science, and so we're talking about the characteristics of life. Good morning. Yes. All right, so check this out. All living things. What is the difference between a living thing and a non-living thing? Do all living things move? There's my question. Does all living things move? Yes or no? Let's make it into living things are living. Wait a minute. That's not a very good scientific way. All of those things on the slides. Okay, fine. All living things have these characteristics. First, they are organized. Second, they grow up. They grow and develop. Now, I bet you're thinking, wow, Mr. Dalday, I've seen your office. It's not very organized. You must not be living. Well, yeah, but the parts of my body are organized. It's not talking about how you live. It's not. It's talking about stuff. So they grow and develop. Very cool. They reproduce. Okay. They respond to some kind of stimulus. They maintain a certain internal condition and they use energy, which makes me think: are robots living? Well, obviously you would say no, but I'm wondering if you could have a robot build another robot. I would say that they're not. They're like, I mean, I'm wondering if you can program build. Yeah, you're right. That's building. That's not reproducing. All right. Anyway, robots obviously aren't living, no matter how far we build them. But they can fake living, or they can pretend to be living. Anyway, that's a little bit off the topic. I was just wondering because I'm going to be watching this movie. It's a scary movie called Ex Machina or something like that. And I thought it was interesting because they're talking about artificial intelligence and that kind of stuff. Anyway, definition. Number 1, organisms. Things that have all the characteristics above. Any kind of organism is living. Organisms have all the characteristics of life as we define them above. So for example, plant. Is a plant living? Yes. Oh, awesome, awesome. It's organized. It has. It responds to stimulus. It can reproduce. It maintains a certain internal condition. It uses energy. Another question is fire. Is fire living or non-living? No? No? Yeah, I know that's an interesting question. It's okay. It breathes, or at least we say that fire breathes. It consumes oxygen. It grows and develops. It can respond to stimuluses as in wind and water and that kind of stuff. But here's my thing that I'm thinking: it doesn't really reproduce, so it's not alive. I mean, there's other reasons why fire is not alive, but it does use energy. So not everything that seems to be alive is alive, and things that might not seem to be alive can also be alive. Like, for example, if you go into your refrigerator, if your mom has ever made bread, or your dad, I mean, it doesn't have to be mom, but if people make bread, have you ever heard of yeast? Okay, yeast is this thing inside of here. It smells really bad. It's probably inside of your refrigerator. It doesn't necessarily even need to be in your refrigerator. I just put it in my refrigerator to keep the bugs out of it. But yeast is what causes bread to rise. Here's my question for you: is yeast alive? Yes or no? Yes and no? Yes and no. Well, no. We're not talking about zombie yeast. We're talking about, is it alive? Yes or no? There is no yes and no, my friend. Okay, I've got someone saying no. I've got Josh saying no. I've got Monica saying yes. Ciara saying maybe. Julian saying kinda. There's no kind of alive. I've got Seamus saying yes and hello. Okay, so I've got I've got maybe half yeses, half nos. Would you guys think that? And actually, you know what? I'm not going to tell you the answer because that's something we are going to explore on Wednesday. So anyway, I just wanted you to think about it, and I wanted to know what your thoughts were. Yeast. All right, so a cell. What is a cell? It's the smallest unit of life. If we break life down into the smallest piece of something that is still alive, it would be the cell. So, there are different types of organisms. One is called a unicellular organism, as in a single cell. Uni being one, as in unicycle, having one wheel, or unitard being one piece of clothing that ballet people wear. Anyway, unicellular means one cell organism. So there's different kinds of unicellular organisms like an amoeba, and also a paramecium and a euglena. These are different kinds of unicellular organisms. They only have one cell that they have. Don't living things have nucleuses? That's something we're going to explore when we talk about the anatomy of the cell. We haven't gotten there yet. All right. Multicellular organisms would be things that have multiple cells. So, for example, frogs and fish and humans and things that have much more than just one cell. All right. Let's go into growth and development. Check, check, audio check. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Bo, did you turn up the speakers? Am I on mute? Wait. Seamus, can you hear me? All right. Whoever can't hear me should log out and log back in. Sorry about that. Everyone else seems to hear. All right. So we're going to talk about growth and development. For example, all living things grow and develop. And they grow in different stages, and the different stages that they go through is called development. For example, a frog. A frog starts off as an egg, and then it develops into a tadpole. And then what happens is that tadpole becomes an ugly tadpole with legs. And then that ugly tadpole grows bigger legs and grows bigger. And then that ugly tadpole grows into an ugly frog with arms and legs, and switches from breathing air or water to air. Yes.
Teaching a class right now?
Yeah. What's up?
Okay, never mind. I'll email you.
No. What's up? Real quick.
I gotta change on grade for one kid.
Oh, just one kid, or just the whole? Did I mess up
One
something?
kid.
Okay.
I'll email you.
All right. Okay. Yeah, and its tail falls off. I have a question for you. Here's my question: Is this starts off as a few cells. Now, when you go here, are you talking about, like, let's say that this had 10 cells to begin with. Let's say that from an egg it had 10 cells, and I'm just pretending because it has much more than 10. When you go to this tadpole stage, are we talking about the same 10 cells, just bigger versions of them? No. We're talking about more cells because the cells themselves split into more cells. They grow more, they reproduce into more cells. And then these cells divide into even more cells. And then these cells divide into more cells. So we're talking about maybe the same size of a cell, but there's just a whole bunch more in a frog than there is a, and there is an egg, right? And these cells are different, right? These cells, there aren't just a whole bunch more of the same kind of cell. Like you have different kinds of cells, like skin cells and muscle cells and blood cells and, frog cells and whatever cell that they have inside of there that make up this frog. There are different specialized versions of cells. Does that make sense to you? And that's kind of an important topic that we need to cover. All right, the reproduction. I know I feel like I'm going through this really quickly, but you guys are sticklers for burning me on the amount of time that I have. So let's, sorry, I gotta move. All right, reproduction. Reproduction is essential to a species survival. Reproduction doesn't necessarily have to happen in every single member of that population. Just some of them, as long as a few of them reproduce, that's what's important for their survival. We cool? All right, so this picture is of a organism. It's just basically a bacteria, and what's happening to this bacteria is it starts off as one piece right here, and then it splits up into two different kinds of cells. And so basically what it's doing is it's cloning itself. And that's one way that cells can reproduce. They don't always reproduce in the way that you learned in health class. Let me see. All right, here we go. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Sorry, suppose. All right. All right. So you're cloning the cells, and so basically you have the same cell that's being split into two. All right. All right, the second type of cells is these cuttlefish. They're not octopus, they're cuttlefish, and they're actually really cool. They change shape and all of that kind of stuff. And these guys mate to reproduce. And this is in health class, so I'm not going to tell you guys about the mating process of these things. But anyway, yeah, there we go. Mating. That is a common way to reproduce. Way a lot of humans and also other animals reproduce. Here's a really interesting one. See this Komodo dragon? Now this female Komodo dragon does not need to mate to reproduce. And this is actually found in only a few species. She's all like, nah, I don't need no man. She doesn't need a man because she can actually create an egg and the sperm that will produce, or that will fertilize that egg at the same time. I think that's pretty crazy. You can just basically have one of these and then have a whole population of them. You don't need a boy and a girl. Yeah, anyway. That would be, I forgot the word for it. I don't know. It's not asexual. It's gosh, I forgot the word for it. I got to come give you the Greek word for it. It's pretty cool. Anyway, the next one. What do the men do? That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know what the men Komodo dragons do if they're not needed. Yeah, they're used for research and they bite things. All right. Response to stimuli. So there's different kinds of stimuli and all living things respond to stimuli. For example, there are different versions of stimuli. One is internal and one is external. An internal stimuli would be like your stomach growling if you are hungry. This person is hungry and their stomach is aching. And so that is a stimuli that is inside of them that they are responding to, and the response is they are going to eat food. Whereas there's an external stimuli. For example, if I punch you in the face, or maybe I punch and then stop right before I hit your face, you're going to blink. And you'll be like, ah, right? Or if I clap right in front of your face or something, or be mean, or, pull out a knife and then like almost stab you but not actually stab you, right in your face. Yeah, you're gonna, and your eyes are gonna close. And you're probably going to jump back. Well, that's an external stimuli. I'm externally stimulating your body, and you're moving, reacting because of that. Or there's this light, right? And then this is an external stimuli, but this plant, look at how this plant is going to grow towards the light. Anyway, that is plants move towards light. And that is a version of external stimulus. All right, moving forward because you guys want me to go quickly. All right, Homeostasis. Homeostasis is an organism's ability to maintain a steady internal conditions when the outside conditions change. I think that when I learned this for the first time, I thought, I wonder if cold-blooded creatures go through homeostasis, because cold-blooded creatures can't really control their internal temperature, whereas or internal conditions, whereas humans can, right? We keep we keep our body temperature at about 37 degrees Celsius, and if we go a little bit below or above that, we get pretty cold or hot, right? But actually, all living things have some ability to maintain internal conditions when the outside conditions change. For example, here's a single cellular or a unicellular organism called a paramecium, and this paramecium is it's a unicellular organism that lives in fresh water. So it only has one cell. But inside of this cell, there's these things called a contractile vascule. You see that thing right there? It looks kind of like a starfish in the middle. And then over here, it looks like a brittle star. This almost looks like the sun you drew as a kid. And then this looks like a brittle star down here. You guys see that? All right. Yeah, so what's happening is this is actually the same thing inside of this thing. But the thing is, this one is full of water, whereas this one is dehydrated. It's contracted, and it's doesn't have any water in it. So what this thing is doing is it's helping it control its water intake by changing this almost like its stomach. But then again, this is a unicellular organism, so it doesn't have a stomach per se. But it's almost like this thing expands when it needs water in there, and it contracts when it doesn't need any water in the cell. So what it's doing is it's controlling its internal conditions when the outside conditions change. Does it make sense to you? And no, I am not talking about a Pokemon. I'm talking about a paramecium. Is a paramecium a Pokemon? It could be. I don't know. All right, energy use. I don't know if you can see these things right here, but all life forms, all animals, everything that's living needs energy. And most of the energy that all of this stuff comes from, and it's not even a picture in here, it comes from what? Excuse me. What does it come from? It comes from other animals. I like that. Yeah. That's a good idea. But no, that's not really it. It actually comes from the sun. Yes, very good. Because the other animals, what do they eat? Well, they eat other animals, and then they eat other animals and other animals. But eventually you'll get down to some of those animals end up not eating other animals. They eat plants. Well, then now what? Okay, well then the plants, where do those guys get the food? They get the food from the sun. So technically, the hawk up here and the coyote down here all get their food from the sun, when you really think about it, right? Because like the sun feeds the plants, then the plants feeds the ant, and the ant is eaten by the anteater or the squirrel or whatever, and then the squirrel is eaten by the coyote, or the squirrel is eaten by the hawk, or the squirrel is eaten by the rattlesnake, and then the rattlesnake is eaten by the hawk. And there we go. And it's the circle of life. Same thing happens inside of the ocean. You got the bacteria that is feeding on the cephalopods, which is, the giant squid is feeding on. The giant squid is being eaten by the whale, and then the whale is eaten by the killer whale, and the killer whale also eats the sharks. And everybody eats the tuna. Yeah, anyway. And then we eat everything. We are at the top. All right, moving on. Actually, I thought this was really interesting. I wanted to show you this lady right here. This lady, her name is Dr. Aquino. I think it's Adriana Aquino, and she is, and let me pronounce this. I'm sorry. It is an ichthyologist at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. She specializes in classifying species of fish, such as the armored catfish that lives in South America. Now, here's what's really interesting about this armored catfish. Okay, here's my question. Have you ever wondered why animals need oxygen? All animals, including you, get their energy from food, and when you breathe, the oxygen is used in your cells. Chemical reactions in your cells use oxygen to change energy to food molecules and into energy in your cells. Mammals and many other animals get their oxygen from air, but most fish get their oxygen from the water. Either way, after an animal takes in oxygen, red blood cells carry oxygen to the cells throughout its body. Now, there's a special kind of catfish that lives inside of the Amazon, and it lives in freshwater rivers. The thing about these catfish is these guys live in not fast moving water, but these guys live in water that is like very still. And so what happens when water doesn't move very much is there's not a whole lot of oxygen that's in it. So what are these catfish, what are they able to do? Well, what happens is these catfish have gone through adaptations so that they can take the oxygen directly from the air. Now, what's crazy is these catfish can switch from going to using their gills or using their lungs, and they can only do this when they don't have any food in their stomachs. And some of these species of armored catfish can actually survive for 3.5 days outside of water. They can breathe air for 3.5 days. No, not three. I'm sorry, 1.5 days. Still a lot. 1.5 days. That's crazy. You take a fish out of water, you figure it's going to die after another, 20 minutes or whatever. But we're talking about 1.5 days. No, not over 60 hours. That's too much. But, yeah. Anyway, pretty cool. All right. Moving on. Chapter 2, Classifying Organisms. So, there's a bunch of different ways to classify organisms, and it's kind of started off with a really bright guy. His name was Aristotle. Actually, you want to know something, to be honest with you, is I found that Aristotle has been wrong most of the time. It's crazy. Anyway, Aristotle, he started classifying things into either plants or animals or not living things. Then, in the 1700s, there's this guy named Carolus Linus. He was a Swedish physician, and he and a botanist, and he classified things into their kingdom. So he kind of came up with these names over here: the fungi, the plantia, the animalia, the protozoa, protista, and also he called these ones over here, he called these monera. Okay? Then, later on, in 1969, that's pretty crazy. We're talking about 200 years later, a American biologist said, wait a second, this Monera thing that he classified, I'm going to break these down into two separate pieces. One I'm going to call bacteria, and the other one I'm going to call archaea. Archaea bacteria. So we have eubacteria and archaea bacteria. So what he ended up doing was when he did this, he created another section that is kind of a domain that's called, here's the bacteria and here's the archaea and here's the eukarya or eukarya. Does that make sense? All right, so let me tell you a little bit about each piece. Okay, things that are in this category right here, this bacteria. Bacteria are usually simple unicellular organisms. Archaea is a simple unicellular organisms that live in extreme environments. So these ones are like the regular bacteria, and then these ones are like the Red Bull crazy bacteria. Make sense? Like these ones go extreme. All right. Protists are unicellular and are more complex than bacteria and archaea. So these ones are still unicellular but more complex. Fungi are unicellular or multicellular and they absorb food. This kingdom is all the plants, and plants are multicellular and they make their own food, and that's pretty crazy. And then the animals, those are multicellular and they eat the food that the plants make, or they eat other animals, or they eat other fungi, or bacteria, or all of that kind of stuff, and above. Does that make sense? Yes. So this is the Red Bull bacteria. I don't know if I should say that, but I mean, these guys are like this. This is like the regular bacteria, and they're unicellular organisms. And then these are the ones of the Red Bull bacteria. And what I mean by that is these ones are the ones that live. They're the same as unicellular organisms, but they live in extreme environments. All right. Here's another. I think that this is maybe an easiest way, a nicer way to kind of look at it. This is really the same table as before, but it's easier to see it like this maybe. So the domain, you have bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And these guys, the bacteria goes to the bacteria domain, the archaea goes to that, and then the domain, the eukarya, can break into these different types of things. So you have the plants, the fungi, the animals, and the protists, and that kind of stuff. Yeah. All right. Binomial nomenclature. Now, these are big words that freak people out. Binomial. What does the word bi mean? No, not bi as in B-Y-E. Bi as in, no. As in bicycle. Or, yeah, bicycle. Yeah, there we go, two. All right. So, binomial basically means two in number. And nomenclature, does anyone know what the word nomenclature means? You're going to hear this word later on, maybe in your chemistry class, maybe in your English class. It's a really simple word, or simple meaning. It just means name. So if I ever teach you nomenclature in chemistry, which is what I taught in chemistry this past year, all I was talking about is naming chemicals. So binomial nomenclature is just a really big word for two names. It's almost like the scientific community gives each species, each thing, each organism a first and a last name. A binomial nomenclature, two names. Got it? That describe what it is. So if I were to talk about the eukarya domain, that includes 4 to 10 million different kinds of things. So I would be like, hey, I saw something from the eukarya domain, and you'd be like, well, I don't know exactly what you're talking about. And then I said, well, actually, I saw something from the Animalia kingdom, which now what I've done is I've narrowed it down from 4 to 10 million to 2 million different things. And you're like, well, I still don't know what you're talking about, but at least I know you're not talking about plants. Does that make sense? Or I could say, I saw something the other day that was from the order Carnivora, which basically means, yeah, it sounds like Minion language, which basically means meat eater, right? So then you can say, well, that's about 270 different species, and that includes bobcats, pandas, polar bears, brown bears, but it doesn't include the squirrel. So at least you narrowed it down for me. And I say, well, I can tell you, saw something from the Ursus, and they used to say, well, that could be the white bear, or the polar bear, or the brown bear, or the grizzly bear, or the different kinds of bears. And then I could say, oh, I saw an Ursus arcturus, or Arctus, and that's the two different names. Ursus means bear, and Arctus is talking specifically about the brown bear. So that's the only one thing that I could have seen is the Ursus arcturus that limits everything down to one thing. Does that make sense? And I can use those two names to identify that one thing that I'm talking about. If I told you just Ursus, then you'd just be like, well, wait a second. You just told me you saw a bear. You didn't tell me what kind of bear. It could have been a panda bear. It could have been a teddy bear. Well, technically teddy bear wouldn't be classified in the living classification. So probably not teddy bear, but it could have been a polar bear or a brown bear or a grizzly bear or, I don't know, a panda bear or whatever. But then you say, no, I saw an Ursus arcturus and then Arctus, and then you say, oh, okay, wait a second. That is exactly a brown bear. Actually, we're not going to finish at 11:25, but would you give me like 2 more minutes? I've got 2 more slides. All right. A dichotomous key, and one way we use to help describe to people what kind of thing that we saw, we can give them a dichotomous key. And let me show you the basic, easy version of a dichotomous key. And it could be a little crazier. So, you start at the top, and you go through these things. And if you don't see the one that you're looking for, then you move on to the next. So it's not always the easiest thing to do, but yeah. All right. So Slater, you already looked at the dichotomous key for the Beatles, and my answer is, well, you can look at the dichotomous key for this one and kind of understand this is the smaller version of that. So like, all right. So check this out. The beak is relatively long and slender. Which beak has a relatively long and slender beak? Which bird? W, X, Y, or Z? See, that's a toss-up. I would actually say it's Y. Long and skinny. Yeah. All right, so it's Y. So apparently bird Y is a Carthidia. I'm horrible at pronouncing these names. All right. The bottom. So if it's not long and slender, so we're looking at bird W, for example, or let's look at bird like X or something like that. What is bird X? It's not long and slender, so we move on to the next. The bottom surface of the beak is is flat and straight. Is this bottom surface of the bottom beak flat and straight? No, it's curvy. So it's not a Geospiza. I would say that's bird W. So we look on, okay, so it's curved. Okay, go on to the next step. Is the lower edge of the upper beak, it has a distinct bend? No, it doesn't. I would say that's bird Z. So apparently bird X is the very bottom one. Its lower edge of the upper beak is mostly flat. Oh, that's bird X. Does that make sense to you? Do you understand how to do the dichotomous key? The beetle one is really just doing the same thing. It's just a lot more puzzle pieces. Another way I could give it to you, and this is the last slide, is a cladogram. And this is a branch diagram that shows a relationship amongst organisms. For example, this branch diagram kind of goes from the left to the right. So, you have the hagfish. After that, you have jaws down here. Now, this jaws is talking about everything above this area has jaws. So apparently the hagfish does not have jaws. Whereas you have lungs over here, and the perch fish and the hagfish both do not have lungs, but everything above it has lungs. Or claws or nails. Well, salamander does not have claws or nails, so you have to stay outside of that one. But the lizard does have claws or nails, so you get to be in this upper category. Does that kind of make sense? Now, a pigeon has claws and nails, and it has feathers, but it doesn't have fur. A mouse has fur, and a chimp has fur. And a mouse and chimp, they have fingernails or claws. Do you see how to read this diagram? It's pretty straightforward. Like fish don't have claws on their feet. So it kind of tells you if it's further to the right and kind of clumped together, you could see how they're related to each other. Kind of this nice diagram to see how the things are related to each other real quickly. Are we cool? So I just covered chapter 1, lesson 1, and lesson 2. So I lectured on everything you need to know for this week. You should be good. I know that most of you tried the homework already, and I hope that you found that it was pretty straightforward, and you guys can go. Slater said no for what? I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to start the recording. We'll get this